So we're not going specifically into what typical development is tonight. We're talking more about what a delay looks like. If you look back at the previous webinars, we go a lot in depth of what typical development looks like, and how we expect kids to kind of move through these different milestones. So tonight we're really talking about the difference between delays and disorders, and kind of how to spot those, and what we can do when we do start to spot those. But I've got a few handouts I've been meaning to ask, actually, how we disseminate those. I've got to email you to ask, how do we get those handouts out with, like, our typical milestones and that sort of simple information that we've been going through recently. I'll add that to do later. Should we jump into it?
Yes, please.
Yep. All right, cool. All right, so welcome everybody. If you don't know me by now, my name is Erin Nicklin, and I'm a paediatric speech pathologist and director of Each Speech Pear Plum Speech Pathology in Indooroopilly. Really excited that you're joining us tonight. We're talking all about speech and language delays versus disorders. So what you need to understand about delays and disorders and how they present in our little people. So firstly, before we begin, just want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm speaking to you from today, the Turrbal and Jagera people. I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I honour the powerful connection that the First Nation people hold to the land, community and language, the heart of our communication and identity. And I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us this evening as well.
Erin, sorry.
Yeah.
I think you've got the Teams screen on top of your
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. There we go. Sorry, thank you. Okay, so before we start, a little about myself if you don't know who I am. I'm a paediatric speech pathologist. I own and operate my business out of Indooroopilly underneath my house, because I believe that working from home and have people coming to my home is far more inviting and connection building than at a clinic. Won't speak to you soon because I'm sure we'll have to move at some point. I also have been working for the last 10 years, and I've only ever worked in paediatrics in my professional career. So as a student, I worked with adults as well, but I do love little people. I have a special interest in early communication, so that's 0 to 3 years, particularly speech sound disorders, early literacy, and supporting parents to feel confident and connected to their child's development. And I really love to empower parents with education and the knowledge of how to support their children. I am also a parent myself, so you'll see my children throughout the entire presentation. I think they're really cute, so I'll put them in lots of pictures all the time. But I do understand what the juggle is like when you are trying to manage children, work, childcare, and also trying to figure out if their development is typical or not. So I do like to come from that point of view of, is this for me? Is this going to be realistic for me? So what's really inspired this session is that recently I found a lot of parents have been having a hard time understanding when I'm talking about delays versus disorders and what the significance of each label means. So I hope that tonight you learn something new, or you get some sort of reassurance and feel more empowered. If you've got any questions, throw them in the chat. If we start talking in the middle of the presentation, I'll get very sidetracked. So I'll try and power through, and then we can do questions at the end. So what we're going to cover tonight is that, oh, it's taking a while to load. Really looking forward to spending this hour together, but we've got a lot of things we're going to go through tonight. So it looks like a lot. We're probably going to gloss over a few things, but we're going to look at what's the difference, a delay versus a disorder. We're going to do a few case studies tonight as well, so that you can get a really good understanding of what each means. We're going to talk about why the difference of that terminology matters, and also talk about common myths, because I know I talk about this a lot in my webinars, but I really want that to hit home tonight, that a delay and a disorder are really crucial things to look for, and that the myths that we are hearing all the time are myths, and we need to stop listening to those. We're going to look at some red flags at different ages, so particular red flags. And then we're also going to look at why early intervention matters and why it's not wise to be waiting to get support. And that's not to shame anyone, that's just to provide you with the best information that there is. What you can do while you're waiting for support, because getting supports at the moment is challenging. There are wait lists everywhere. I don't normally speak about what we offer as a business, but I do want to raise this with everyone tonight, is that we have an initial appointment promise where you can always get support from the get-go, and then pathways to support and funding. So we're going to go into depth about the funding options that are available as well, and then a bit of a parent action plan, and then questions and answers as well. Okay, so we're going to do some interactive polls throughout the night, and we're going to kick off with one of them to start with. So I'm not sure if everybody has used this before, but there is a website called menti.com. So if you can pop that up on your phone or your iPad or your laptop, whatever you're using, and enter this code in there, what we're going to do is I'm going to just pop that in the chat. There we go. So I'm going to put that straight into the chat. So we're going to go to www.menti.com, and our code is 88518443. And if you can all jump onto that, I'm going to share our little poll that we're going to do tonight. There are 2 questions that I want to ask you before we start tonight. Now I've lost my, there you all are. And I'm sorry if you can hear my children in the background. They're not normally here on a presentation night, but they are tonight. Okay, so we are going to start with this one. Now, hopefully people have jumped on. Please let me know if you're having trouble. It's just having a think. Okay, so our first question that I want us to go through is, who feels confident knowing the difference between what a language or speech delay is versus a language or speech disorder? So if you've jumped onto that website, popped in that code, the options, please let me know if they've come up for you. Oh, it's working. I shouldn't be so shocked that it's working. Okay, somewhat confident, not confident yet. Great. Okay, so we're feeling not confident yet pretty well. So, oh, 50-50, okay. Cool, so we've got some sort of idea, which is great. Excellent. That's really good to see. Okay, we're going to do our next one. Which area do you feel least confident in? So spotting language delays, spotting speech difficulties or delays, knowing when to do something about it, or understanding the funding pathways. Okay, knowing when to act. Great, that's excellent. Spotting speech difficulties, yeah, that can be really tricky. Cool, that's really great to know. All right, I'm going to stop that. We'll jump back into the presentation. And, oops, where did you go? There we go. Okay. Okay, I'll move you guys out of the way. All right, great. Thanks so much for doing that. I shouldn't be so excited that worked, but that's really helpful to know. So we're going to jump straight into what is the difference between a delay and disorder, so that we hopefully feel more confident in understanding that terminology. So the heart of our talk tonight are these 2 concepts. So we have a delay. Now, a delay means that your child is on the same developmental pathway as their peers, as everybody else in their cohort, but it's taking them longer to get there. So if we're thinking about a train, you know, your little person might not be combining words yet after 2 years of age, but they're still adding vocabulary and using gestures each week, adding more and more, but they're just simply a little bit delayed. So let's say, you know, we've got child A who's, you know, left the station, child B is leaving the station at the same time, but A gets to their destination sooner than B, but they've gone the same journey. They've met they've met each milestone, they've just done it at a different time. Whereas if we're thinking about a disorder and talking about a disorder, that means that our development is taking a different route. It's not following that same track, that same train track that other children are following. It's actually veering off, and it's taking its own course or going a different way. So the order and pattern that we see for those children are unusual, and their errors usually persist even when you'd expect them to have resolved. So for example, a 3.5-year-old who might be speaking, but they consistently struggle with their grammar. So, they might be talking, but instead of saying he went yesterday, he would say he go yesterday. We're having those persistent struggles with things like grammar or word structure. That child might also have difficulty following classroom instructions and maybe showing some signs of developmental difficulties with their language. So when we start to see disorders with our language, we might think of something called developmental language disorder, which affects around 1 in 14 children in our classrooms. Another example would be something like childhood apraxia of speech, which is where speech is highly inconsistent and effortful. So our kids have typical speech sound errors that they make, but our children with a motor speech sound disorder have a completely different path, and they come off that track and they show us different key characteristics in their development. So why does this matter? Because the strategies that we use, the intensity of support that we use, and the long-term outlook differ significantly depending on whether we're looking at a delay or a disorder. And it's a really key distinction that we need to make and understand for us to provide effective and helpful intervention that's going to support our children in a way that really matters. So now that we kind of understand what those two are, we're going to jump into this first case study. So we're going to call them Sam. Now, Sam is 22 months old. He understands everyday instructions. So 22 months old being nearly 2. He points, he uses gestures to communicate. He adds new words to his vocabulary each week. But his parent is worried that he isn't putting words together yet. So I'm going to jump back onto that presentation here. I'm going to put this here. Hopefully, there we go. We can see. So we're going to move to our next one. Going across. Okay. Oops. Here we go. Sam. So do we think that Sam is showing us presenting with a delay or a disorder? We're thinking understands everyday instructions, points, gestures, adding new words and vocab each week, but his parent is worried that he isn't putting the words together yet, which we would expect at about 2. So we've got delay coming through, which is great. That's exactly what we would be saying. So this is most likely a delay. Sam's got strong understanding, using gestures and adding words. And many children like Sam are what we call a late talker. So they start combining words a little bit later than average, but they are otherwise following the typical developmental sequence. So about half of these kids will catch up by preschool age, and especially with parent strategies when they're supported by a speech pathologist or another professional. However, some late talkers are at risk of ongoing language difficulties, so monitoring and early support is always wise. Jump back into there. Okay. All right, let's have a look at why the difference matters for our children. So understanding whether a child has a delay or a disorder is more than just a label. It changes what we do next with that little person and family. So if it's a delay, they might simply need monitoring, enrich language experiences at home, and check-ins to make sure that they're catching up. Many late talkers do close their gap by preschool, especially if parents are supported with the right strategies. There's a lot of research to support this as well, that we can do that watch, monitor, light touch support options. However, if a child's presenting with a disorder, they might need they will need targeted therapy. So for example, a child with developmental language disorder doesn't just grow out of it. So without support, we call it DLD. It's linked to ongoing literacy difficulties, academic challenges, and even some mental health vulnerabilities later on. And similarly, children with motor speech disorders or significant speech sound disorders as well need intensive structured intervention to build really clear and consistent speech. This distinction between delay and disorder is also really important for funding and school supports as well. So a diagnosis can open the doors to things like NDIS support, although I say that cautiously because there's a lot of change in that space happening, but learning support in schools and adjustments in the classroom as well. So when we say delay versus disorder, it's really not about the label. It's really about planning for the right help at the right time for the best outcomes and getting the supports that that child needs. So we're going to look at some common myths that we're always hearing, and we're going to pull up the poll for this one. I think everybody who's seen my presentations knows how much I love myths, but who has ever been told not to worry about their child when they've raised concerns and then later found out that their instincts were correct? I've actually experienced this as a parent myself. It took me, I think, 4 GP visits to feel heard that my daughter wasn't hearing. Hearing tests showed that she wasn't hearing and she needed grommets pretty quickly. But it took me 4 GP visits. So, you know, if I couldn't get somebody to take me seriously, I imagine everybody else has had a hard time with that too. Okay, and I'm really sorry to hear that. That's really sad that, you know, you had concerns and you weren't taken seriously. Which of these have you heard before? So they'll grow out of it, boys talk later, 2 languages cause delays, screens are educational, or you've heard something else. If you've heard something else and you want to share, please put it in the chat. I'd love to add to my list of myths. Okay. All right. I'm going to say before we do anything else, 2 languages does not cause delays. And I would take that to my grave, and all the research shows that too. Okay. All right. So let's go through why these are myths and they're not actually true. Okay, so the first one, they'll grow out of it. We hear this all the time. Don't worry, they'll grow out of it. Sometimes that's true. Late talkers with strong understanding and gestures often do catch up. But for many kids, especially those with things like developmental language disorder or other things at play, the problems will persist without targeted therapy. So research shows that these children are at risk for ongoing literacy and learning difficulties if they don't get the support. Now, that's not to scare, that's just what our evidence shows us. So while waiting might feel reassuring, and everybody's telling you to do it, it can actually mean missing a really, really great window for the best outcomes. So if somebody tells you to keep waiting, you say, no, my friend Erin said, we're going to go do it now. Boys talk later. This is a big one that I've heard a lot. So we often hear, he's fine, boys just talk later, they're slower than girls. So research shows boys can be slightly slower in early talking, but it doesn't mean that we should ignore those red flags. If a child, a boy or a girl, isn't meeting milestones, that's a signal that we act and we don't wait. So we don't want gender stereotypes to delay the support that our children get. I see this one a lot. I see it a lot in my extended family as well. I usually have to walk away, but this is one that I hear a lot as well. Families who speak 2 languages. So I hear this a lot, and that was really sad to see that that came up in the poll, that you've heard 2 languages cause delays. Families are sometimes told not to speak 2 languages at home, and even worse than that, they're told not to speak their home language at home. If you've been to my webinars before, you know I feel very strongly about this. The research is really clear. Bilingualism does not cause delays, and children can learn 2 languages very successfully. They might spread their words across both languages, but they're not confused and they're not delayed. They've just got skills across 2 languages. In fact, bilingualism is a huge strength for problem solving and thinking as children develop. So please keep speaking your home languages at home. Screens are educational. Screens can feel educational because there's lots of things on them like songs and colors, but passive screen use, and I see passive screen use a lot and I use it personally at home when I need to, it's not enough for language development. Research also shows that heavy screen exposure is linked to weaker language skills as children get older. And what matters most when we're learning our language is actually our back and forth conversation. That's what's most important for our children developing language, is going back and forward. So if we are using screens, the most helpful way is sitting with your child and talking about what you're seeing together. So doing that co-viewing together. This is kind of a moment of do as I say, not as I do, because we do use screen time at home just to give ourselves a break. And don't go thinking you can't do that, because everybody needs to survive. And then therapy later is just as good. I've heard this one recently with some new families that have popped in, that they held off because it was their understanding that later could be just as good. However, one of the biggest myths is this. The opposite is true. So evidence, again, is really clear. Early intervention really matters. Children's brains are most adaptable in the early years, so that 0 to 5 year range. We call that neuroplasticity. And research consistently shows that that early intervention leads to stronger outcomes, faster progress, and prevents difficulties from snowballing, so getting bigger as they're getting older. Waiting often means therapy takes longer and it becomes more complex. And I remember reading a few weeks ago that if you targeted, let's say we're targeting our R's, if you targeted that R sound, so if we're saying wed instead of red, if you targeted that in therapy before 5 years, you would get it done kind of, in a couple months if things go well. But if you targeted it at 5 years or older, you're going to take the same number of sessions regardless of what age from 5 years onwards. So it's going to take you, it's not actually going to take less. It's going to take more than if you did it before 5. I hope that comes across in the way I want it to come across. So let's have a look at our second case study, Mia. So Mia is 3.5 years old. She speaks in short sentences. She struggles to follow her kinder instructions. She says things like, "He go yesterday," and teachers are worried about her learning. So I'm going to pull that up again. Let's see if we can identify whether this is a delay or a disorder. Great, you guys have been so quick. Yeah, absolutely. So this is most likely a disorder. So specifically some type of language disorder. These children may speak, but their grammar, vocabulary growth, and understanding are very atypical. And unlike a simple delay, they don't just catch up, and they need very targeted and repetitive support. So without intervention, language disorders can impact that reading and writing and classroom learning. So the key message here is that children with language disorders often fly under the radar because they can talk. Often they can talk a lot, but the quality of their language is very different to a child who might be delayed or typically developing. So we're looking at the quality for this little person. All right, let's have a look at some red flags. Now I have condensed these compared to what we've done in previous webinars, but we're going to have a look at when some red flags are and when we should be acting. I have broken it up into what a delay might look like versus a disorder. It's not, it's not the holy grail with this. This is just some idea and some key points to give you a bit of an idea when thinking about the little people that are on your caseload or in your classroom or your own child. So the difference between the delay and disorder really becomes clear when we start to compare what these red flags might look like. So the delay meaning that they're following the same pathway. So at 18 months here, we might have fewer than 10 words, but we still have gestures and we're still understanding. Whereas if we're looking at potential disorder, we might be 18 months with no babbling history. Or very little response to language. So it's quite, you can see the difference here. It's quite different. We're still making gains when we're looking at a delay. We're still using different components of language and communication, whereas in a disorder, not a lot has started to happen yet. We're looking at 2 years. We might be limited to two-word combinations, but our vocabulary is slowly growing. So we're still making those little steps forward. We're still using 2 words. We're just a little bit slow. If we're looking at a disorder and we're 2 years old, we might have less than 50 words. We might not be putting 2 words together at all, and we might have a really hard time understanding what people are saying to us. So following simple directions like go get your shoes or where's mum, those sorts of questions. At 3 years for a delay, we've got sentences, but they're short, and we're adding new words slowly, and we can understand simple requests. So again, it's what we're typically wanting to see, but it's just that little bit slower and just behind their peers. Whereas if we're looking at disorder, a 3-year-old might be limited to sentence variety, or limited sentence variety, sorry. So we might only be saying, you know, mummy shoes, mummy keys. We might have grammar errors that persist. So here go yesterday. Another one that I see very commonly, and it, you know, A doesn't equal B, but often I'll start to see at this 3 years, we start having difficulty with our pronouns. And usually we'll just use one single pronoun for a lot of different things. That usually kind of flags for me. And then at 4 years, we might struggle with narratives. So telling people stories about things that have happened to us, or retelling a book that we've, like, you know, a favorite book of ours, and not able to follow multi-step instructions. You notice that I don't have 4 years here in delay, and that's because generally kids have caught up by that 4-year mark. Now we've got our red flags by speech. So here we have got our delay. So 2 years, we have a really small sound system, but it's growing steady. And when I say sound system, we might have a small number of different sounds that we say. We might be dropping the endings of words. So we might say cat instead of cat. At 2 years, we might have a very limited sound inventory and very few recognizable words. So typically these are the kids who they could say a few things. Mum might understand a couple of them, but everybody has a very hard time recognizing those words. At 3 years, when we're looking delayed, speech can be understood by familiar adults, but strangers may really struggle. So familiar adults being mum and dad. Often I find mums will understand more than dads. That's like no shade to dads. Usually mums are just with their kids a little bit more because they're at home still. And strangers will really struggle. So parents usually take on that interpreter role for them. If we're looking disordered, we've got hard to understand, even for parents, and very inconsistent errors. So a child might go to say, you know, we might go to say apple, but we say it differently every single time. So for children who are delayed 4 years, we don't expect them to catch up with their speech with delays. They might still be working on really tricky sounds, so our R's, L's, and THs, but overall progress is visible. R's, L's, and THs are tricky sounds to develop, and we don't expect TH to develop fully by like 6 years. So, you know, that's okay. That's an appropriate error that we're seeing there. And then by 4 years, strangers, if we're looking like there might be some disorder in our speech, strangers can't understand speech. Our children often start to get very frustrated because they know what they want to say, they just can't be understood. Unusual error patterns. So we might do things like back to front sounds or vowel. We call them distortions. So any of our A, E, I, O, U sounds, we've got lots of them in our language. They might sound different or like another one. When we say back to front sounds, instead of saying sounds at the front of our mouth like cat, we might say cack. So putting that T sound all the way to the back. That's usually a very big red flag for us. And then any signs of childhood apraxia of speech or motor speech sounds. So inconsistent word attempts. If we keep kind of groping and putting our mouth in a different position, like trying to figure out how to say the sound, or we've got a very little babble history. Okay, we're going to do one more case study, and this is going to be for Leo. Now, Leo is 3 years old. Oh, I didn't change Leo's picture. Leo and Mia look the same. His speech is inconsistent. The same words sound different each time he says them. He had very limited babble as a baby, and he gets really frustrated when he's not understood. So what do we think? What do we think Leo is presenting with? A delay or a disorder? Oh, geez, people are fast. I love it. Disorder. That's right. I really hope that everybody's starting to understand the difference a little bit more. Great. Yeah, this points really strongly to a disorder, likely a motor speech sound disorder, or CAS is what we call it. So where the brain has difficulty planning and coordinating muscle movements for speech. Key features are inconsistent words, effortful or groping mouth movements, and often limited early babble. CAS requires frequent and intensive speech therapy. So children like Leo are at a higher risk of frustration and social withdrawal if they're not supported. So early diagnosis for these little people is very, very vital. Okay, I'm going to go back because I do have a few other questions that I wanted to ask. I forgot that it was there. I need to put some notes in. How confident do you feel spotting red flags for speech and language now after hearing those little red flags that we kind of went through just then? Very confident, somewhat confident, not confident yet. Oh, good. Feeling confident. Great. Awesome. Yeah. What we might do is, I think if people would find it really valuable, I mean, I've got some milestone things. I do need to talk to Little Wonders about how we can disseminate that, or I can figure out how to put it on my website. Actually, that might be helpful. I'm just going to jump back to, oh, we've done them all. Okay, great. Leo, okay, we're not going to do that one just yet. All right, so we're going to talk about why early intervention matters. When we jump into this is probably our key takeaway tonight, our most important takeaway after understanding the vocabulary, the concepts that we're going through today. So the brain in the early years is at its most adaptable. So we call this neuroplasticity, as we mentioned before. So when we support children early, the brain builds new connections more easily, and therapy is often shorter and more effective. So, for example, large studies show that parent-implemented interventions improve children's expressive and receptive language, so the way they say things and their understanding, when started between 18 months and 5 years. So with stuttering, we know that we have a program called the Nicklin program, works best in the preschool years. So starting earlier means faster recovery and fewer long-term challenges. The flip side of that is that untreated difficulties don't just disappear. So children with developmental language disorder, co-occurring language disorders who miss out on early help, they're at a greater risk for those literacy difficulties we've spoken about, reduced academic achievement, and even social emotional challenges as well. So when we say earlier is better, it's not just a slogan, and it's not just trying to pile on to all the things we have to do as parents of young children. It's evidence-based, and acting now can make huge lifelong changes and differences for our little people. So while we're waiting, we're going to do I put together a little bit of a checklist, and I can turn this into a PDF if that would be helpful. But I do want to pause here and say that if you're feeling unsure, there are things that you can be doing while you're waiting to be seen or get support. So some things you can do while you're waiting. It's super frustrating sitting on a waiting list, and it's also very frustrating calling, 20 different speech pathologists in a day to hear we've got a wait list. So what can we do first? First, you can rule out your child's hearing and vision challenges. Even if you get in to see a speech pathologist, they're going to ask you to book a hearing test. It's the first thing we always want to know. Do we have adequate hearing access or sound access? If you're going to see an OT, they'll want to know about vision as well. So even if your child passed newborn checks, because we all have our newborn screening now, things like glue ear or middle vision problems can pop up later and affect development. So when we say glue ear, that's recurrent ear infections. And I might scare you here. You don't have to have recurrent ear infections to have fluid on ears as well. Sometimes children can be completely asymptomatic. My daughter is a very good example of that. The only reason why I pushed to have her hearing tested and an ENT review was because the way she was saying sounds was very unusual. Not all parents are going to pick up on that. I had worked for about 5 years in hearing loss, but it still took me that much time to get people to take me seriously. The hearing test then supported what I suspected, which was very helpful for me. What else can we do? We can read daily and we can narrate our routines. So reading books is one of the best things that we can do. If you're going to take nothing away from tonight, take away that I need to read books every day. I know that's really boring sometimes for parents, especially if our kids only want to read the same books over and over. It's actually really great. If we do repetitive book reading, that's consolidating their language knowledge that they've got. And when I say narrating routines, I want you to think about being Morgan Freeman or David Attenborough on a documentary. Just talk about what you're doing, what your child's doing, what dad's doing, what brother's doing. You will drive yourself crazy. And if you start to feel crazy, start to sing it, because the more we can talk and model to our children with good language, the more they're going to get exposure and practice to those language concepts. We can reduce noise in screens as well. So background noise, so music in the background, having the TV on all the time. If you've got neighbours, you know, who've got construction on, closing the windows if you can, if it's not too hot. But reducing that background noise or TV time can really help to build opportunities for your child to develop their language. Sharing your small goals with educators. So educators are allies. So share 1 or 2 of your small weekly goals with your child's teacher or kindy. Like, you know, we're really wanting to practice these 3 new words. You know, we were really interested in this on the weekend. We've started in, you know, we talked about, let's say we talked about bees this weekend. We read a book about bees, and now we're really working on practicing the word buzzing and honey and flying. If you can help us with learning those new words, or, you know, using the gestures, that would be really helpful. Educators are great. They're always happy to help with that. And then tracking progress. So you can take little short videos or notes to help you see the changes, and you can then give professionals really valuable insights into what you're seeing at home. I always recommend to families, have a little folder in your photo app on your phone and just mark it as, you know, so-and-so's progress, or, you know, little videos to help me remember, and take some little videos of what's going on for your child, because that way you can pull it up and you've got that record, you've got it all recorded. And when we can't pull it out of our brain, because some, you know, that can be really hard, especially when we're seeing a professional, it's hard to remember everything we want to say. We can say, actually, I've got a video and I can show you exactly what's been happening. So these strategies don't replace therapy by any means, but they do make sure that your child is supported every day while you're waiting, and they do support you to gather all the information that you need to be empowered and to show people what's going on for you and your family. So a little thing about our initial appointment promise, and I promise I won't ever talk about the business again, because that's really not what these presentations are for, but it is something that I like families to know. So one thing that I really pride myself on in my work is that waiting lists suck, but I will always get somebody in for an initial review. So I might not have a regular spot for therapy for families straight away, but I will always get you in to help you understand what is going on for your child, what funding options are available for you to go and seek out, and what you can do while you're waiting. And once you've had that appointment, or you're part of our community, you get access to things like waitlist cancellations. And I'll often send an email or a text just to check in, see how you're going. I also will try my best to get you in as soon as possible once I understand what's happening too. But we do always get families in for an initial appointment, so you can understand what's going on and you can get some peace of mind while you are on waitlist, because that's probably the hardest thing, is sitting there waiting, not knowing what to do and not knowing what's going on. Okay, that's enough about Each Speech. So pathways to support and funding. So it looks different depending on your child's needs, but here are the main pathways. So we've got GP and Medicare. So your GP can write you a referral for up to five subsidized allied health sessions per year. It's called a chronic disease management plan. You need to go in and specifically ask for that. Otherwise, they'll just write a standard referral, and I'll have to, people will have to send you back and ask for the 5 subsidized sessions. A GP referral to speech, ENT, audiology, and pediatrics as well. So they can refer you to multiple different people. The chronic disease management plan does have specific criteria. Not all children will meet criteria. However, it is definitely worth talking to your GP about it. It makes accessing services a bit more accessible for families, and a little bit more affordable as well. I think they subsidise up to, at the moment, it might be $62 per session. So there will always be a gap fee, but you do get some of that money back. NDIS early childhood approach. I won't talk too much about this because there is a lot changing at the moment. However, it does support children currently under 9 years with a developmental delay or disability. There is access via the early childhood partner, so the ECEI or the ECA, and they can fund speech pathology, OT, psychology, equipment, home support, physio, lots of different providers. Public health services, so there is a community child health speech pathology department, so community child health centres, you can get access if your GP refers you, hospital outpatient clinics if you've got an appropriate referral, or there's child and family health nurses. There's education system supports. So early childhood development programs are in Queensland, and there's specialised playgroup and kindy programs run by either therapists or specialised teachers. They are phenomenal programs and absolutely worth looking into if your child meets criteria. There is also learning support in schools, so small group intervention, teacher aid time, and school-based speech pathologists as well. Okay, and private options. So private health insurance, if you've got extras, it may cover a portion of the sessions, and you can do self-funded therapy as well. So that means you've got flexibility of location, timing, and service delivery as well. Now, our parent action plan that we've got, there's only 3 things. So I don't want this to be complicated for anybody. I just want you to notice. I want you to watch for red flags and don't rely on the myths. Just block out all the noise and just listen to, yourself, listen to your gut, see what feels right for you. Then act. So you can seek an assessment, you can book a hearing vision check, or you can ask for help early. And then you can support. So use home strategies, partner with educators, and follow up with professionals. Don't let people have you sitting on wait lists. Follow up with them. That's okay. Okay, and our last thing, we're going to jump on for a few more of these little questions. So after tonight, what step feels most achievable for you if you've got a child who you're thinking, you're concerned about? Would it be booking a hearing or vision check, trying some strategies at home, talking with the child's educator, or seeking an assessment? I really hope you do the Morgan Freeman one at home. It drove me crazy when my kids were little, but I still do it. And I just laugh at myself now. Seek an assessment, okay. Great. All right, we might move on to the next question. Book a hearing and vision check. Great. I think with the hearing and vision, hearing particularly, I think it's very easy for us to kind of think, well, they had that at birth, the newborn screening check. So it's not something that we kind of have at the forefront of our mind because it feels like it's already been ticked off. But hearing is always something that needs to be done if we're looking at some red flags or potential delays or disorders. Okay, and what is one thing that you plan to do next week? Except we're missing a question, so just have to stop that. All right, look at that, guys. I haven't finished 20 minutes early tonight. Okay, so wrap up and question time. So here's some more places that might be useful for you. Speech Pathology Australia always has their communication milestones available. I think I've left my literacy ones in here. The Hannon Centre is a very good place to go look at for extra strategies for building language through play and reading. Oh yeah, I did. I left my old slide in. Sorry, I'll update those for you all. Okay, And thank you for joining. So I always ask, please provide feedback. I love to know how I'm doing. I love to know what's useful and what's not useful, because that's the only way I can make these better and improve them and make them worthwhile for you. As I have said before, these webinars are all for families and educators to learn so that you feel more empowered. So feedback always gives me a better direction as to where to go. So I'll leave that up for a little bit, but it is time for questions now. If I can find, where's the chat? There we go. Can we have a look at the helpful links? Oh yeah, sorry. It's actually got a few of my literacy ones in there, but I might just pop in the chat some of the places that are really great to go to. I'm just going to see. I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to send through in the chat my links. That will be helpful because that will be more updated. I've got it in a Word document. So Raising Children's Network is a really great one. There we go. Speech Pathology Australia, Hannon Centre, and Bilingualism Matters is great as well. Okay, there's a few chats in here. Give me 2 seconds. All right. So interesting that a child who has a disorder often has more words than those who may have a delay. Yeah, absolutely. I think I obviously see a lot of children. Our children with disorders are often acutely aware that things are really challenging for them. And I often find their language is very empty, you know, so we might just talk and talk and talk. And, you know, they're the kids that kind of have so much to say, but it actually doesn't mean anything. So it's always really interesting that they can appear as though they have more language. I find that often more physical as well in terms of their play. I really like that rough play too. That's not every child, but certainly appears that way at times. Okay, question. A child stuttering at age 3 will grow out of it, or how soon should someone seek help? That's a really great question. I suppose I always lead with it really depends. I always need more information. However, if a child is presenting with something that appears as though it's a stutter, it's always worth getting checked. I mentioned something called the LIDCOM program before, and that's one of our gold standard stuttering treatments. I suppose I don't like using the word treatment, but we know that approach is effective up until about the age of 5, and then we have to switch into a few different approaches because it doesn't work as well. So when we think about stuttering, there's 2 types of stutters we typically see. So we'll see a developmental stutter, and that usually happens when we have a mismatch of our language and cognition. So we might have a big spurt with our language, and then all of a sudden kids start using, I suppose, lots of usually single words like it's like that, when that cognition and language is mismatched. Usually I find it's when our cognition has a jump and we don't have the language yet to describe or talk about the things that we're thinking about. So they usually use those stuttering moments to give them time to fill the space so that they can find the right words for that. Then we have our typical, not our typical stutter, but we have a stutter. And that's when we start to see kids with repeating of single sounds, single syllables, or words. We also start to see things called prolongations, where they might drag out a sound. So instead of saying the sun is shining, they might say the sun is shining. We also then start to see blocks. So that's when a child might start to talk, but then they actually get physically stopped and their airflow cuts off. It doesn't stop them breathing, but all of a sudden everything stops and they get stuck in those words. So at age 3, if stuttering is becoming, if it's becoming really obvious, then it's absolutely worth getting checked out sooner rather than later. I wouldn't really wait on a stuttering. And in fact, it's always better to be told it's just a developmental stutter or a transient stutter, rather than, better to have come in, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Hi, Erin. My daughter has a hearing check going for another, has been to a speech pathologist and she didn't take to her, I've got such a strong-willed child and worried about having to. Oh, that's so hard. I'm so sorry that that's what you've experienced. I suppose it's kind of like people, right? Not everybody's going to like everybody and not everyone's going to respond to everyone. I absolutely agree that it is concerning when you know, finances are a limited resource and it's not something that we want to keep spending if we're not going to find the right match. I suppose if you are feeling that, you know, your child might need a specific type of therapist, I would be open to, or I would suggest contacting the providers and asking, you know, do they offer any kind of like, you know, play and stay, not play and stay, it's like any kind of trial appointments, or, you know, just get to know each other appointments. I have a few kids like that, or families that call up with the same concerns. And, you know, I say, why don't you come in and you see the space, you meet me, we see how we go. You might also find that the approach could have been mismatched to the child. So if we're thinking about traditional speech pathology, where, you know, we might sit down at a table and chair and we might have a worksheet, or we're going to do this, this, and this, and it's not my rules, but I'm going to set out the session and I'm going to set the structure. Some children don't respond to that very well, and she might need more play-based therapy where, you know, come on in, it's free reign. What are we going to do today? We're going to do some cooking in the kitchen. Are we going to play this game? Are we going to go outside on the swings? I say outside on swings because that's what we can do here at Each Speech. But you might need to kind of have a big think about what type of approach is going to suit my child, and go from there. So we need this type of approach. Let's see what services are around that might offer that. I hope that's helpful. It is really hard finding the right fit. Okay, see, 3.5-year-old, their speech has regressed or stagnant type. No real improvement. Was delayed. Slow development. Yeah, okay. Train, bus is yellow, pick 3.5. Doesn't take to helping him in the slightest, gets really upset about. Go away if we need to him speaking. Oh, he sounds like he's having a really hard time, Claire. Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot going on there, Claire, and I think it would definitely be worth getting him to come in and see, like, go in and see somebody. Yeah, he sounds like he's having a really hard time. I'm not sure what steps you've taken so far, but if you are able to, I would go and talk to your GP about it and get a CDM, and seek out a service to maybe get some support around figuring out if there's anything going on for him, because we don't want him to have, you know, we don't want him to have tough experiences when he's 3.5. He's only a little person and life shouldn't be hard and frustrating and challenging for him. So I would definitely, look at getting some support and just figuring out what's happening for him. I hope that's helpful. So you've got a couple more minutes. Any more questions if you've got any? Word sentence structures like me, no, like, or me, jump, very minimal, words like that. Or I'd probably need to know a bit more, Danica. It depends, I suppose. No, it's not, it depends. If we reflect on the way that we're modeling, if we're modeling sentence like me, no, like, or me, jump, then that would be appropriate. However, if I think about 3 years old, what would I be expecting them to say with pronouns? No, me, jump, and me, no, like is not what I would be expecting to see. I'd want to know more about this little person, but if that's our typical sentence structure, then it's probably, it would be worth getting an opinion on if there's anything going on, just like a check-in and see. There we go. I think I've seen some familiar names tonight, so it's nice that there's people popping back. As I said, please let me know if there's any topics that you'd like to do. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight, everyone. I hope you got something out of it. I'm always available by email, or you can give the clinic a call, or you can find me on Instagram, probably doing silly things. But I hope everybody has a good night, and yeah, has learned something.